Picture this. The year is 1665. England's most powerful king sits alone in his private chambers, clutching a letter that could destroy everything he's built. Outside, the court whispers about his favorite. Inside, Charles II faces an impossible choice: crown or heart, duty or desire. What happens when the man who rules a kingdom can't rule his own feelings? Before we dive into this forbidden royal affair, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me, would you risk everything for love? Now, let's go back to 1665 and witness a love that shook the throne. The candles flickered in the king's private study as Charles II paced the Persian carpet, his velvet robes swishing with each agitated step. It was past midnight, but sleep had become a stranger to him lately. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw him. George Villiers, the second Duke of Buckingham, with those piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through the royal facade. "Your Majesty, the council awaits your decision on the Dutch matter," his secretary had said earlier that evening. But Charles couldn't focus on the Dutch. He couldn't focus on Parliament, or the plague creeping through London's streets, or the whispers that followed him through the corridors of Whitehall Palace. All he could think about was the way George had looked at him during that morning's hunt, not with the practiced deference of a courtier, but with something raw and honest and terrifying. It had started innocently enough 6 months ago. George had returned from exile in France, all continental sophistication and dangerous charm. Charles had welcomed him back to court as his father's old friend, nothing more. But George Villiers was aflame, and Charles found himself a willing moth. "You seem troubled, Charles," George had said one evening, dropping the formal address when they were alone. That simple intimacy, the use of his name without title, had sent electricity through the king's body. "A king is always troubled," Charles had replied, trying to maintain distance. "A king is also a man." George had stepped closer, and Charles had felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "And this man looks like he needs someone who sees him, not just the crown." Now, months later, those walls lay in ruins. The door creaked open, and Charles's heart lurched. George entered without knocking. He never knocked anymore, dressed in a simple white shirt that made him look less like a duke and more like everything Charles wanted. "You're avoiding me, Charles," George said, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "I'm the king. I'm avoiding everyone." Liar. George crossed the room in 3 strides, standing so close Charles could smell the wine on his breath. "The court is talking, Charles. Chancellor Clarendon asked me directly about our friendship." Charles felt ice flood his veins. "What did he tell him?" "That you're my king and I'm your loyal subject." George's eyes burned with intensity. "But we both know that's not the whole truth, is it?" The truth was impossible. The truth was that Charles II, King of England, Scotland, and Ireland, defender of the faith, had fallen desperately, recklessly in love with George Villiers. The truth was that every law, every tradition, every expectation of his throne stood between them like an army of ghosts. "George," Charles's voice broke, "this can't continue." "Why? Because your advisors disapprove? Because the church condemns it? Because history will judge you?" George's hand found Charles's cheek, a touch so gentle that it made the king want to weep. "All of it, everything." "Then let me make it simple." George's thumb traced Charles's jawline. "Do you want me to leave?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Outside, London slept. Inside, a king trembled. "No," Charles whispered, and the word felt like surrender and salvation. "God help me. No." George pulled him close, and for the first time in months, Charles stopped being a king. He was just a man, holding on to something precious and impossible. But in the darkness beyond the candlelight, the door to the study opened a crack, and someone was watching. And what they saw would change everything. The next morning, Charles woke to catastrophe. His chancellor, Edward Hyde, Earl of Clarendon, stood in the council chamber with a face like thunder and a document clutched in his trembling hands. Around the table, 12 of England's most powerful men watched Charles with expressions ranging from pity to disgust. "Your Majesty," Clarendon began, his voice deadly calm, "we must speak about the Duke of Buckingham." Charles felt his blood turn to ice, but he kept his face neutral. "What about the Duke? His influence over you has become concerning." Clarendon placed the document on the table. A letter, written in an anonymous hand, detailing exactly what had been witnessed in the king's private chambers. "The court is talking. Parliament is asking questions. Your enemies are sharpening their knives." Charles scans the letter, each word a dagger. Unnatural affection, dangerous intimacy, a king corrupted by sin. Someone had seen them. Someone had betrayed them. "This is slander," Charles said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Clarendon's eyes held genuine pain. "Charles, I served your father. I helped you reclaim your throne. But I cannot protect a king who makes himself vulnerable to such accusations. Send Buckingham away, now, before this destroys everything we've built." The other men nodded. One by one, his advisors told him what he already knew. George had to go. Charles dismissed them all and sat alone in the council chamber, staring at the letter. He could hear his father's voice in his head. A king's first duty is to the crown. But what was a crown worth if he had to tear out his own heart to wear it? That evening, he summoned George to the rose garden, away from prying eyes. "They know," Charles said without preamble. "Or enough of it. Clarendon wants you exiled. Others want worse." George's face went pale, but his voice remained steady. "Then send me away. I won't be the reason you lose your throne." "Don't you dare make this noble," Charles snapped, surprised by the anger in his own voice. "Don't you dare pretend this is easy. It's not easy." George's composure cracked. "Do you think I want to leave? Do you think I haven't imagined a world where we could just be?" He laughed bitterly. "But we're not common men, Charles. You're the king, and I'm the fool who fell in love with someone he can never truly have." The confession hung between them like a prayer. "I could protect you," Charles said desperately. "I could make a decree. You could start a civil war." George's eyes glistened. "Your reign is already fragile. The plague, the Dutch, the religious tensions. If you add this scandal, England will tear itself apart, and I won't let you destroy your kingdom for me." Charles grabbed George's shoulders. "What if I want to? What if I'm tired of sacrificing everything for a throne I never asked for?" "Then you're not thinking clearly." George pulled away, putting distance between them. "Your father died for this crown. Thousands fought to restore you. You don't get to throw it away because loving me is hard." The words stung because they were true. "So what do we do?" Charles asked, feeling helpless for the first time since his coronation. George reached into his coat and pulled out a sealed letter. "I've already written to my estate in Yorkshire. I leave tomorrow quietly. No drama, no spectacle. Just gone. George." "Let me finish." George's voice broke. "I'll go because I love you, Charles. I'll go because keeping you safe matters more than keeping you close. I'll go because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them what they need, even when it destroys you."
Charles felt tears burn his eyes, tears he couldn't shed in public, tears that had no place on a king's face. "I don't know how to let you go." "Then don't think of it as letting go." George stepped closer one last time, pressing something into Charles's palm. "Think of it as keeping me safe. Somewhere in England, I'll be alive and thinking of you. That's better than both of us burning together, isn't it?" Charles looked down. In his hand was George's signet ring, the Buckingham seal, warm from George's finger. "One more night," Charles whispered. "Give me one more night." George's answer was to kiss him, desperately and completely, in a garden that smelled of roses and rain and endings. But neither of them knew that in the shadows, the king's brother James watched with calculating eyes.
Charles never got his final night. At dawn, soldiers arrived at George's apartments with orders signed by the king's own brother, James, Duke of York. George Villiers was to be arrested for crimes against the dignity of the crown and transported immediately to the Tower of London. Charles learned of it when he woke to find his brother standing in his bedchamber looking insufferably self-righteous. "What have you done?" Charles demanded, still in his nightclothes. "What you couldn't," James replied coldly. "I've removed the threat to your throne. Buckingham is in custody. By tomorrow, he'll be on a ship to the colonies, and this sordid affair will be finished." Charles felt rage explode through his chest. "You had no right. I had every right. I'm your brother and your heir. I watched you destroy yourself over that man. I watched you make a mockery of everything our father died for." James's face twisted with disgust. "It's unnatural, Charles. It's sin. And I won't stand by while you drag the Stuart name through the mud for your perverted—" Charles's fist connected to James's jaw before he could think. His brother stumbled back, shocked. For a moment they stared at each other. Two princes, two brothers, separated by an impossible gulf. "Get out," Charles said, his voice deadly quiet. "Get out before I have you arrested for treason." James wiped blood from his lip, his eyes hard. "Treason is protecting your kingdom from your weakness. History will thank me." He left, and Charles stood alone, trembling with fury and fear. George was in the tower where traitors were held, where his own father had sent men to die. Charles dressed in seconds, shouting for his guards, for his horse, for anything that could get him there faster. The ride through London was a blur. The tower loomed before him, ancient and terrible, and Charles burst through the entrance with royal authority blazing. "Where is the Duke of Buckingham?" The guards led him to a cell in the White Tower. Not the dungeons, at least, but still a cage. George sat on a narrow bed, his fine clothes already looking rumpled, and when he saw Charles, his face broke into something between a smile and a sob. "You shouldn't be here," George said. "I'm the king. I can be wherever I damn well please." Charles turned to the guards. "Leave us." They hesitated, then obeyed. Alone in the cell, Charles grabbed George's hands. "I'm getting you out. I'll pardon you. I'll exile James. George interrupted gently. "You'll start a constitutional crisis. James acted with council approval. If you overturn this, you prove everything they're saying about me, that I've corrupted you, that I've made you weak, that I matter more than the kingdom." "You do!" The confession tore from Charles's throat. "God help me, George, you do matter more." George pulled him close, resting their foreheads together. "Then let me save you from yourself. Let me go quietly. Let your brother think he's won, and you stay king, strong, untouchable, free." "I don't want freedom without you." "Then take memories instead." George's thumb traced Charles's cheekbone. "Remember that you were loved. Remember that somewhere someone saw the man behind a crown and loved him anyway. Remember that you're not alone,
even when I'm gone." Through the small cell window, dawn light crept in, golden and cruel. Their time was running out. "I'll write to you," Charles whispered. "Secret letters. No one will know. They'll intercept them. Then I'll find a way. Charles's voice broke. "I can't just lose you, George. I can't." "You're not losing me." George kissed him one last time, soft and final and devastating. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. The guards were returning. "I love you," Charles said desperately, needing George to know it, needing it to be spoken aloud at least once. "I know," George smiled through tears. "I've always known." The door opened. James stood there with officials ready to escort George to the ship. Charles watched, helpless and heartbroken, as they led George away.
And in that moment, Charles III made a decision that would haunt him forever. That night, Charles II sat in his council chamber and did something unprecedented. He abdicated. "You cannot be serious," Clarendon gasped, face ashen. "I am entirely serious." Charles pushed the unsigned decree toward him. "I'm renouncing my claim to the throne in favor of my brother James, effective immediately." The room erupted in chaos. Advisors shouted. Clarendon looked ready to faint. James himself stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. "Charles, think about what you're doing," Clarendon pleaded. "The restoration, the peace we've built, is worth nothing if I have to live as half a man." Charles stood, and something in his bearing silenced the room. "I've been a good king. I've rebuilt England after the Civil War. I've brought stability and prosperity. But I've also been miserable. And I'm done." "This is madness," James hissed. "You're throwing away everything for a sodomite?" Charles moved so fast that James stumbled backward. "Say one more word about George, and abdication will be the least of your problems." He'd never spoken to his brother that way. No one had ever heard the king speak with such raw emotion. "I'm not asking permission," Charles continued, addressing the whole council. "I'm informing you. Tomorrow morning, I'll sign the decree. James will be king, and I'll be free." That night, Charles sent a single message to the Tower: "Wait for me." By dawn, London was in uproar. The king was abdicating. The king was mad. The king was leaving. But Charles didn't care about London's opinions anymore. He went to the Tower himself, dismissed the guards with royal authority one final time, and opened George's cell door. "I thought you'd come to say goodbye," George said quietly. "No. I came to say hello to the rest of our lives." George stared at him, uncomprehending. "What?" "I abdicated. James is king now, which means I'm just Charles Stuart, private citizen, free to love whoever I want." Charles's smile was the first genuine one he'd worn in months. "Free to choose you, George." "You can't... Charles, you can't throw away your throne." "I can, and I did." Charles pulled George to his feet. "You said I had to choose between crown and heart. So I chose. I chose you, George. I chose us. I chose a life where I get to wake up next to you instead of waking up alone in a palace." Tears streamed down George's face. "You beautiful, ridiculous fool." "Probably." Charles laughed, giddy with the insanity of it all. "But I'm a fool who's done pretending, done hiding, done sacrificing everything for a throne that made me miserable. Where will we go? France, maybe? Italy? Somewhere sunny where no one cares about English scandals." Charles cupped George's face. "Somewhere we can just be George and Charles. Two men who love each other. Does that sound good?" George kissed him, fierce and joyful and free. "That sounds perfect." They left England 3 days later, quietly, with nothing but 2 horses and the clothes on their backs. James became King James II, and history would remember his reign as brief and troubled. But history would also whisper about Charles II, the king who loved too much, the king who gave up everything for an impossible romance. 10 years later, in a small villa in the Italian countryside, 2 men sat on a terrace overlooking olive groves. Charles's hair had gone gray at the temples. George's hands bore the calluses of a man who'd learned to tend gardens instead of navigate court politics. "Do you ever regret it?" George asked, as he did sometimes on quiet evenings. Charles looked at the man beside him, older now, laugh lines deep around his eyes, hand reaching for Charles's in that familiar, comfortable way. "Not even once," Charles said, and meant it with his whole heart. Because he'd learned something that kings rarely understood. Power was nothing compared to love. Crowns were cold. Thrones were lonely. But this, sitting with George as the sun set over Italy, their fingers intertwined, their future uncertain but shared, this was everything. "I love you," George said, as he did every evening. "I know," Charles replied, as he always did. "I've always known." And in that moment, Charles II wasn't a king or an exile or a scandal. He was just a man who chose love over duty, heart over crown, truth over pretense. And that, perhaps, was the greatest act of courage any king could ever perform. So, what do you think? Would you have made the same choice? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you loved this story of forbidden royal romance, hit that subscribe button, because history is full of love stories that deserve to be told. See you in the next one.